What brings you out here today?
I am out here because I don't have enough money to make a difference in this world, and that's frustrating. It's frustrating that a corporation, a person like me, has all the rights as somebody who actually exists. That's nonsense.
What's your sign say?
Just keep American dreaming.
And do you believe in the American dream?
Not so much. Not so much. I understand the value behind it and maybe what initially went for, but I think it's long lost that ability when it's everything's stacked up against you. I mean, ask a student with mounds of debt and no job opportunities. That American dream is pretty far away at that point, you know.
Some say the American dream is based on domination. What do you think of that?
I think that is very true. I think we're doing a pretty damn good job of it. I think collectively we run shit. Well, maybe not we, but as an America, we definitely run shit.
We can't survive. We need your help. Get rid of environmental regulations. Get rid of labor unions. The federal government has played, again, a vital role in all that. The New Deal, which is considered the height of American reform, was actually intended to rescue capitalism. At that point, there was a real fear that fascism, which is another form of capitalism, or communism, which is the opposite of capitalism, would take root in the United States. Franklin Roosevelt had to regulate the system to save it. His predecessor, Herbert Hoover, who's a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, had one of my favorite quotes. He said, "The problem with capitalism is the capitalists. They're too goddamn greedy." And so Hoover understood, you got to regulate these people, not because they're too powerful or they're oppressing people or cheating or lying or stealing. You have to regulate them because they'll screw themselves over, which is what we're seeing today, because there's no regulation. The banks have called the tune all along. Today, let me just sum up a few things. Today, we're talking about Wall Street, but there's another area we need to talk about. We know about Goldman Sachs, we know about Citibank, we know what's going on, Lehman Brothers, AIG, but don't forget, there is also in the United States, courtesy of the federal government, a vast and growing military-industrial complex. And too often, we're not hearing about that. Last year, the CEO of Lockheed Martin made $21.89 million. The CEO of Northrop Grumman made $22.84 million. The CEO of Boeing made $19.4 million. Since 9/11/01, 10 years ago, the federal government has spent $7.6 trillion with a TR on war or terror-related activities. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, interventions in Libya and a lot of other places, homeland security, and if you want to include the Bush tax cuts in that, it's through the roof. Again, the federal government has played this role. The military, of course it is. The military then has as its main purpose to protect commerce. The military's role isn't to humanitarian. They're not going into Libya to save the Libyans from Gaddafi. Because 2 years from now, you'll see that the new thugs are no different than the old thugs. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. They are there to protect, in this case, American oil interests. Within that context, one of my favorite quotes of all time. Has anybody heard of General Smedley Butler?
Yeah.
A Marine general. Yeah. Smedley Butler said, I helped, and he was a Marine general, I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba decent for the National Citibank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1909-1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, I helped to see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket on 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. Clearly then, the military existed in order to promote these interests. Woodrow Wilson said that the key purpose for American statescraft was the extension of American commerce. and American military forces had to protect America's commercial interests. And he said, even if the sovereignty of independent nations be outraged in the process, a very explicit and candid explication. We don't really care about other countries' independence or self-determination or sovereignty. What's important is our ability to invest, to trade, to get markets, to get cheap labor, to get resources. All right, I'm gonna finish with the words of William Jennings Bryan. You all heard of the populists? Probably the greatest challenge to capitalism in US history. They actually wanted a government established bank for farmers. A bank for farmers, not just for financiers. They wanted government nationalization of the railroads. Okay? Of course they didn't get it. The standard bearer for the populists was William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was making a speech, and he said, on the one side stand the corporate interests of the United States, the moneyed interests, aggregated wealth and capital, imperious, arrogant, and compassionless. On the other side stand an unnumbered throng. Well, today we have a number. It's 99%. 1% of this society is as wealthy as the rest of us. And that means we have to come together as that 99%, as a class. We have more in common with each other than we do with rich folks. Black people and white people have far more in common with each other than they do with rich people. Gay and straight people have far more in common with each other than they do with rich people. Third world and first world people have more in common with each other than they do with rich people. Northerners and Southerners have more in common with each other than they do with rich people. Veterans and civilians have more in common with each other. Urban and rural, male and female, we all have more in common with each other than we do with Goldman Sachs, Citibank, and the Congress that they bought and paid for on Capitol Hill. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mussolini, who was the dictator of Italy, was quoted by the late journalist Molly Ivins of the New York Times as having said that fascism is the merger of corporation and state. He said that. Now, I don't want to offend any Italian Americans here, but I will also go one further than Molly did. I will say that Mr. Berlusconi of Italy, the Prime Minister of Italy, Mr. Berlusconi, who kind of has a bald spot. He doesn't quite look like Mussolini. Nobody's that ugly. But Mr. Berlusconi owns the Italian news, media, and entertainment culture industry. He owns it.
And he controls the parliament.
And he controls the parliament. Now, that takes Mussolini one step further. Merger of corporation, merger of state, and merger of the news, media, and culture industry. I mean, he's got more power now with 4 or 5 votes in the Italian parliament than Mussolini ever had. And Berlusconi has had that. I assert that the same kind of thing goes on now, has been going on, is going on, and that we all sense there's something wrong here. We may not have the skill set or the toolkit to really understand yet, but we know something is wrong. And what I would say is that what the Wall Street capitalists learned from the Roaring '20s and from the New Deal, and what they learned from the Gilded Age was, don't take all their money in 10 years. Don't take all their money in 10 years. Instead, starting in 1981, I assert that we have had a creeping cartel capitalist coup d'etat.
It's fascist.
and that means that Wall Street has made to use a Wall Street term, has made a hostile takeover, of the federal, of the state, and even of this city government and the county government and government at all levels. A hostile takeover. A hostile takeover by Wall Street cartel capitalism.
No, central bank fascism.
Well, I think the Federal Reserve is probably one of their instruments that they use to oppress us, but it would be catastrophic to get rid of the Fed and to not keep our focus on where the problem is. The problem is.
Before 1913, before the Fed was there, how was it before central banking existed?
It was unregulated. Banks could issue their own notes. They could issue their own bonds. You had periodic panics because banks would simply issue paper that wasn't backed up, and so you'd have these runs, and banks wouldn't have money to pay off investors. So it was unregulated with kind of ebb and flow. The full faith and credit of the United States government.
That means you.
A hope and a prayer. No, it's backed up with currency. It's backed up with it's essentially the U.S. is its own collateral. I mean, it's the Fed's solvent. I mean, it works for Wall Street. It works for Wall Street. That's what it's supposed to do.
That is an excellent question. What is all this economic crisis about? What is this financial crisis?
Can't we still live?
Can we still live? In 2007 and 2008, and until last year, I really did not understand what the collapse of the financial industry was all about. I didn't take the time to research it on the web. I didn't go read books. Just read the business section in the newspaper, watched somebody on TV.
Scott Burns.
And last year I decided I'm going to understand this.
Instead of taking a blind eye.
Right. And so I went and spent about an hour at Barnes & Noble or Book People or someplace, and I found a book called Hoodwinked. Hoodwink. How many of you know of it or have read it? This book tells you, as they used to say in rural Ohio, how the cow ate the cabbage. This book tells you, you don't need to know statistics, you don't need to know monetary theory, you do need to know what a bribe is, you do need to know what hush money is, you do need to know what debt is, and you're going to learn a whole lot of other things. But what I want to talk about is not only to recommend that book, among others, as something to explain what the hell happened to us in 2007 and 2008. What was that all about? Well, I want to say some words to you and see if you have ever heard these words. First of all, Washington consensus. Has anybody heard that term, Washington consensus? Cut the social safety net. Have you heard those words before? Cut. Where have we heard that? We've heard that right here. The Washington consensus has come home from Ecuador and from Angola and from Indonesia, and it's come home to America, to the United States. Excellent point. This is 5 trillion, as Dr. Buzzanco said, $5 trillion of the Social Security Trust Fund that was borrowed. There's an IOU. That 5 trillion isn't there anymore. There's an IOU from the United States government. What was it used for? To pay for the Iraq War. which I call Iraqi Vietnam, and I also call the other one Afghani Vietnam, because I don't think any of the economic, political, or military elites learned anything at all from what I call Vietnamistan. Vietnamistan. The first Afghan war, the first Iraq war, this Libya, whatever, Syria, here and there, what they learned was what they learned in the Gilded Age and in the 1920s. Do it slowly, or scare the hell out of everybody.
Capitalism is a gun, right? It's the man with the gun, right, that makes it bad work. It ain't the gun, all right? And it's the same thing with the Fed, right? It ain't the Fed, it's the people controlling the Fed, all right? So it ain't the Fed, it ain't capitalism, it ain't none of that. It's the people behind it.
Is it not true that back in the 60s and 70s, the retirement age was 62?
It is true. You could retire early at 62. In fact, my father did, but then
You didn't get full benefits, right?
yeah, and get full benefits.
You
But-
could?
Raised it to
Yeah,
65.
but they changed
Yeah.
the full benefit thing.
Right.
And so now, for instance, if you're 62, you can still retire and get Social Security and Medicare, but you're not going to get, but maybe half of it.
Right now it's 65, but I heard this year they were trying to raise it up to 67.
That's been floated, yeah. That idea's been floated.
Okay, so that's basically the government saying, oh geez, we basically stole all this money. Let's hope that the people die before this age.
I think so.
There's a book I'd recommend. I saw this woman on Jon Stewart last week. It's called The Retirement Heist.
Right.
And it's about not just Social Security, but private pensions, which are just getting ripped off by these corporations.
Absolutely.
There's enough money in private pensions to cover pretty much all the employees already. But they keep talking about all the money they paid out. They're paying it out to CEOs.
Yeah.
So the pensions are kind of like everything else. It's 1 in 99%. Regular workers are getting, these pensions are being taken away from regular workers and being used for these golden parachutes to pay off these guys. They retire and get $450 million, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But your pension plans, whether private or public, are being ripped off. Absolutely.
That's what I thought.
Well, that's why they wanted to privatize them all in
Can you imagine
401k.
if they privatize that, the market drop half its value.
Yeah.
Everybody's pension
loved
would
it
have
at the
lost
beginning.
50% if they had privatized.
Let alone if they privatize Social Security.
No, that's what I mean. If
Yeah.
they privatized Social Security,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
we would have lost 50% of our pensions because the market went down by half in 08 and 09.
I assert that the federal government, all the state governments, and the local governments, including this one, have been the victim, we have been the victim of hostile takeover by cartel capitalism on Wall Street.
My father worked 33 years for United Airlines and retired at age 60, which is an FAA requirement. And then the PBGC decided that since he retired at 60 and not 65, which was our national thing after 9/11 happened and the airline industry was in a tremendous amount of trouble, that he was not entitled to his full pension. He lost 84% of his pension that he worked 33 years for.
See, they do it just a little bit at a time since 1981. You'll notice, or he will notice in your family, but I won't notice in mine. But then now I'm hearing your story. And so I know about that, and we know about that story. And I promise you, this has been a creepy, step-by-step coup d'etat against the 99%, against the federal, state, and local government by Wall Street.
What do you mean when you say hostile? I mean, I don't see the guns out. I think people were just sheep. They just let it happen.
Well, we could talk about that, but I think there are probably some other theories that could explain human behavior on that. But let me just point out, I've seen pepper spray, I've seen mace, I've seen batons.
The response has been hot. They've been hostile to the response, but the takeover itself was just dominoes falling, right?
Well, that's I don't know if it was dominoes falling.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I think
like you said, it was set up that way.
Well, it was set up that way. I mean, I think it's hostile in the sense that these businesses had no interest in their workers or in their retirees. I mean, I think it was done callously and coldly, you know, which is, you know, pretty hostile when you do it
Because
that
they
way.
have no conscience.
No, they have exactly. No, he's absolutely right. I mean, you know, they're only incentive. I mean, businesses. Starbucks doesn't care if you buy a Starbucks in Austin or in Ho Chi Minh City, just so somebody buys a Starbucks. So creating jobs for people isn't their priority. Their priority is simply to get the cheapest labor possible, and to exploit people as much as possible, much like the slave system or the wage labor system. So, I mean, it's a hostile system. You know, the idea that we just let it go. I mean, this is done behind closed doors. It's done in bills that are 800 pages long that nobody reads before they sign or vote for. Yeah.
Well, besides me not getting my question answered about what happens when the calamity and all that, I'm wondering what we're talking about now. Mike, what does that have to do with Walmart teaching their employees how to get food stamps and how to use the?
Well, I mean,
Did everybody hear that? What does this have to do with Walmart teaching its employees to get food stamps and free health care and that kind of stuff?
Did your first question was what risk do we have if the banking system collapses? Was that it?
Yeah.
All right. I mean, the problem there, which you actually was, it was a pretty close thing in 08. The major problem here is companies don't have a vault full of money to pay their employees with. They actually take loans out. It's called commercial paper. It's kind of like a payday loan. These loan shark companies that exist. So the global credit system was so crunched that there was a vast shortage of commercial paper. I mean, companies like GE and GM were literally getting loans that day as they cut their checks to their workers and their vendors and things like that. That's the crisis. If the system really were to collapse, then commercial paper would be unavailable, which means people wouldn't get paid. Which means they'd be out of work. That's the. I mean, as much as we hate, the stock market and everything else, the stock market collapse. I mean, it's nice to say, they get what they deserve, but average people will be the ones who get screwed, But that's the real crisis. It's the availability of credit. This is a global system built on debt and credit. You're born with a certain amount of debt. It's just assumed. The only way to get even is just to in your final years, run up your credit cards and stick Visa with the bill.
And then your descendants pay for that.
Yeah, right. But it's a system based on it's called Marx and others call it a rentier state. A rentier state doesn't exist based on manufacturing or production. A rentier state exists based on credits, on rents, on dividends, not on anything produced. Once you cease producing and becoming a producer country, which the U.S. did around the 70s, then you become a debt country, a rentier state. And when you do that, you run into the kinds of problems. We've had stagnant wages since 1970. I grew up in Ohio too, Youngstown area.
I'm from Youngstown.
You're kidding.
You know Louis Wolk?
No, but
no, I mean he's been on the radio. He's an activist.
Okay,
real good
but in Youngstown, you could work in the mills. A blue collar worker would make enough money to have a house, buy a car, send the kids to college, go to vacation. Right? Since 1970, that's impossible. You now have husbands and wives working, so you have men and women working, which you didn't have really that much before 1970, and wages have been stuck. Keynes called it sticky wages, right? And I'm not much of a Keynesian. I'm actually more attracted to Marx's ideas on economics. But Keynes's basic idea was you had to put money in circulation. You had sticky wages, so you put money. That's if the Fed wanted to do something productive, and this is a horrible solution. But short of raising taxes on rich people, which Obama ain't going to do because he's a Republican basically. The only thing you really could do is keep running the printing presses, and what they call quantitative easing. And that really, at this point, the only solution, you need people to buy stuff. I mean, economics can very easily be explained in, do you have enough money to buy the shit you need? Can you afford to buy rent? Can you afford to buy healthcare? Can you afford to buy a car, transportation, whatever, food?
Can you get your car at an impound?
That's part of it, And so with sticky wages, which means we've seen wages stagnate, over the last really 2 generations, then without some kind of impetus, you're going to see, I mean, Youngstown, if any of you are familiar with Ohio, Youngstown was a very wealthy place. It was one of the steel capitals, like Gary, Indiana, like Pittsburgh. Incredible wealth, population of 160,000. It's down to 70,000. It's a ghost town. Factories
the skies were red.
The skies were red and full of soot when the wind blew. And now it's just desolate. And so those are, I mean, a lot of those people came to Texas because what you saw in the 70s was an abandonment of northern manufacturing to places where there were not unions. And Texas is hostile. The South is hostile to unions. The best program to enter the middle class was and still is joining a union. Unfortunately, only 7% of private sector employees today are unionized. About a third of public employees are unionized. Only 7%, right? Throughout American history, union work has always been better paid, better protected, better benefits, right? This decline that he's mentioned coincides exactly with the decline of unions, the decline of union labor. There was a point at which about a third of the workforce, about 30%, was unionized. Now it's 7%.
They decided that after World War I, the greatest threat would be communism. And what have we been scared of since 1917, and really until now? I mean, people are running for president of the United States now and saying they're commie pinkos. That Obama, of all things, I agree with you. He is not a socialist. He may be a lot of things, but he ain't no socialist. He's no critical theorist, and I don't think he's an Adam Smith capitalist either. And the other problem is, why are the Republicans? This is what I want you to ask yourself. Why? Why is this? How has it come to be that every single Republican in the United States Senate votes to filibuster just about every single thing that Mr. Obama sends up to Congress? How has that happened? And an even more important question, as a former Democrat, how has it happened that there are only 95 of the Democrats in the House and only 33 of the Democrats in the Senate who consistently vote against cutting Social Security, against cutting Medicare, against cutting Medicaid, against cutting Pell Grants, against cutting the Environmental Protection Agency funding? Why are there only 33? We've got 54 in the Senate. Why only 95 in the House? We've got twice that number, and plus Congressperson Giffords. How has that happened? Well, 2 words: campaign contributions. Yes, campaign contributions. They don't bribe them anymore like they did in Daniel Webster's day. Yeah, it's illegal now. But what they do is they have made it so costly for anyone to run for office. Primarily because what's the primary medium used?
Television.
Television. And is that television time free? Oh, so General Electric or Disney or somebody that owns the networks sells commercials during the ABC News and the NBC News or the CNN News or whatever.
On the frequencies provided by the government.
On the frequencies provided by the 99%.
Yeah.
And they just take it to the bank, literally. That's why one of the things I think we could think about is why not offer free television time.
How about free internet?
Free internet. Free,
you do it on the internet. You got your own channel.
Yeah, why don't we own elections?
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, and that would be an authentic.
Get rid of all this other kind of bullshit you got to pay for. tell them everybody gets, you Republicans, you Democrats, all your candidates line up, get your own website, and that's all you get. And you can't have any other minutes.
Well, that's an interesting idea, but that would be something that I would consider authentic Adam Smith capitalism.
The problem is the people who would have to decide that are the people who are already in power, so they would basically be voting to get rid of themselves. So,
yeah,
you know.
We can vote for the guys that do it.
Public financing of elections is the only thing that's going to change that system.
Well,
so people own the elections, and they have machines that tell them and prove the way they voted, then they're never going to be able to change the system by voting.
Well, there is a guy who has been on TV on MSNBC, and he's going to be on current TV right after Keith Olbermann, and his name is Cenk, C-E-N-K, Uyghur, U-Y-G-E-R, I think. Cenk Uyghur. Huh? Is it? You think it's A-R? Cenk Uyghur. I stand corrected or something. Look it up. But anyway, he's with the Young Turks website online, and he has a newscast every day. And he's going to have one on current TV in a couple of weeks. But he has proposed what he calls the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And he announced this at Occupy Wall Street in Zuccotti Park, which I like to call Liberty Square. And the first thing it says in this proposed 28th Amendment is... Huh?
Money does not buy free speech. Money does not buy free speech.
Well, I agree. The first thing in this proposed 28th Amendment is corporations are not people. Corporations are not people. That's the first sentence in the 28th Amendment. And in this proposed 28th Amendment, it says that no one, not me, not the Koch brothers, not Donald Trump, not Bill Gates, not even the saintly Warren Buffett, can give any single candidate more than $100 in any campaign. Well, we had a limit of $2,500, and we actually still have that limit. But to take on the point you raised, free speech means free. You're not supposed to have to pay for it. However, the 5-vote majority on the United States Supreme Court, it's not the same 5 votes that stole the 2000 election, not from Al Gore, but from us. They stole it from us. Al Gore was a bit player, but they stole it from us. It's not that it's 5 votes, but it's not the same 5 votes. This 5-vote majority on the Supreme Court issued a ruling called Citizens United, which was a conservative, capitalist, right-wing group who wanted to appear mainstream, so they called themselves Citizens United. Well, this ruling does 2 things. First of all, it allows Donald Trump and the Koch brothers and Bill Gates and all the top 400 or 500 of the wealthy to make unlimited campaign contributions to what they call super political action committees, super PACs. Not only can they make unlimited contributions, they can make them anonymously. They don't have to be disclosed to us. That's what the Supreme Court said, basically saying if you got the bucks, you can campaign with unlimited anonymous contributions from the 100,000aires and the millionaires and the billionaires.
How many of them were appointed by Bush?
Well,
At least 3.
Well, the first Bush appointed at least one of them. That was Clarence Thomas. And I believe one of them was appointed by President Reagan.
Scalia.
Oh, Scalia, yes, Scalia. Talk about a wicked. Jesus used the word stiff-necked. You stiff-necked people, you don't have compassion on your fellow person. Well, I like those words, stiff-necked. If there's anybody stiff-necked on the Supreme Court, it's Antonin Scalia.
There's always been a gap in U.S. history. There's never been a disparity this huge, where it's really kind of 1 or 2% versus the other 98 or 99. You know, I mean, we're not going to turn socialist. We're not going to have public ownership or anything like that anytime soon. You know, so that's a fantasy. That's unicorn shit and rainbows. You know, in the short term, better wages, a more equitable tax system,
Board governance reform.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if we had simply let the Bush tax cuts elapse, that would, I forget how many trillions that would have, you know, saved us. So. Just, I mean, if you know, it's kind of funny. I've seen recently some YouTube videos of Reagan talking about the need for the rich to pay taxes. Richard Nixon would be a raging liberal today. No, I'm serious.
Yes,
Richard Nixon would be a raging liberal today. He would have no place in American politics. Reagan, frighteningly enough, sounds sensible compared to these guys. But I mean, in the short term, you know, you're going to have this. I mean, this government corporate nexus, and. Our friend's gone, but you know, he kept saying that's fascism, that's fascism has 2 components to it. One is that a very authoritarian political system, which you had in Germany and in Italy, where they literally crushed and killed, you know, labor unionists and socialists and people like that. But the other part is that kind of corporate and government nexus, and that's fascism. You know, in the 30s when Hitler emerged, the only government that opposed him was Stalin's. And the West felt fairly comfortable with Hitler because communism, as you point out, was the enemy. Fascism was a derivative of capitalism. It wasn't that different. And in fact, when Franklin Roosevelt began the New Deal, Herbert Hoover, his predecessor's first complaint was the National Recovery Administration is fascist because it was the state regulating or working with these corporations, this nexus. So Hoover's calling Roosevelt a fascist. So it's not that extreme. But you know what do you do to fix it? I mean, in the short term, you band-aid it. Better wages, more unions.
What are the tricks of capitalism?
But we have
I was just going to say, even Ronald Reagan said communism will not be defeated, it'll be transcended. And, you know, this is like the big crunch, big shift. I mean, it is a paradigm flux. And
it's funny because, you know, well, a bunch of us here lived through the 89-91, the fall of communism. What we're seeing in the last few years in the capitalist world is actually more grave, and yet we're not hearing about the fall of capitalism, right? I mean, what you're seeing now, if you believe in, well, I mean, you're right, this is not Adam Smith capitalism. But what you're seeing now is essentially state socialism on behalf of bankers. You're seeing it in Europe. They bailed out Greece today, or yesterday or whatever. I mean, so you're right. I mean, it's...
I would like to say that we do have an alternative, and that's right here with Occupy Austin. I mean, pretty much is developing into a collective. I mean, we've got the food centers down there. We're trying to get working groups started and take people out to farms.
And that's what I mean by public institutions and public entities. We've abandoned that in this country. I mean, we've kind of, that social contract is gone, and it was always kind of tenuous, but now there's no sense that we have meaning as a public, as people, as a community. No, I agree, totally. I mean, I believe in things like collectives and co-ops and things like that. That's just damn hard in a country of 300 million people to organize.
And if there was a collapse, isn't that what would be the result?
It might. I mean, you know, either, you know.
I said might.
I think a collapse is probably what would finally prompt that, you know, sadly. I don't know.
I was just at the Randalls down Lake Austin Boulevard before I came here, and I saw a sign advertising something. Buy 2, get 2 free. Now, were they apples? How many of you think they were apples? Were they cantaloupes? How many of you think, was it a head of lettuce? It was Doritos. Doritos. It's not a nutritious snack. And they are, and the Dorito company and the Randall's company is saying, come into Randall's and we'll give you 2 for free if you'll buy 2. Now, when do you pay for all those 4 Doritos? You know, when you're in your 60s or 70s, or you get cancer, you start getting plaque built up in your arteries or whatever. That's the payback. And the problem with the cartel capitalism that we have now is that all of the costs, they keep talking about the bottom line. Have you heard that? The bottom line, profit or loss? Well, guess here, just like with the news media, what they don't tell you is far more important than what they do tell you. The bottom line does not include cleaning up toxic waste dumps or pollution, water pollution, air pollution. It doesn't include any of that. And they talk a lot about cost of doing business. Cost of doing business, in my judgment, this is just my opinion, but I consider eliminating, for instance, lead pollution from coal plants to be a cost of doing business. It should be. Why isn't it? This is a question I ask to capitalism. Why is it not a cost of doing business? Why do they want to keep getting out from under the Environmental Protection Agency regulations, which are pretty weak now, and even Obama chose not to implement the new smog regulations, even though there's new science. You know, what up with that?
Distress their value on the stock market?
Well, I think so. One of the tricks of capitalism, and I want you to think about this in your own experiences, not a book, not a magazine, in your own experiences. How many of you get pop-up ads on the internet? How many of you see television ads on TV, or radio ads on the radio, or newspaper ads? How many of you get email marketing? Email marketing. You see these are supposedly discount coupons or cards. Now, I don't know if this is theoretically correct according to anybody's economics, but I consider these to be currency. Currency. Basically, the banks and, you know, Office Depot or Petco or, you know, Express Lube, whatever they are issuing currency, which is what the banks did before the Fed. And so my question is, why is our government permitting this currency? The second thing is, why do these companies think it is their constitutional right to get your name, your address, your phone number in order for them to market to you? Because you know what? I can tell you maybe $10 worth of discounts out of all these cards. But you know how many emails I have received from these cards? It's marketing, it's advertising, and this is the trick of capitalism. They want to make you buy stuff you don't need. Stuff you don't need. With money you don't have. With money you don't have. And if 4 Dorito bags, buy 2, get 2 free, if that doesn't fit that definition, I don't know what does.
You see that kind of erupt in the 1960s prior to that time, very few people had credit cards, and credit was very difficult to come by. Credit was essentially given to people who were fairly well off. Getting a house note, car note, that was even difficult.
Collateral.
And yeah, you had to have collateral. And so in the 60s, what you needed was a mass increase in consumption. And the way to do that is to either put money into people's hands, which you generally won't do because that's considered socialism. If you create jobs, I mean, you can build a bomber, you can build a tank, that's national security. But if you build a school or a hospital, that's socialism, right? So they had to find another way to do that. And what you have is this massive expansion of private credit in the 60s and especially in the 70s. The first thing that happens is the states essentially do away with usury laws, which cap the amount of interest you could charge. So interest rates go from 6-7% literally overnight to the 20, sometimes even 30% range, especially credit cards, like in the late 70s, massive inflation. So
loan
what you
sharks right out of business.
Yeah, it does. It does. And this also coincides. This also coincides with the return and the legalization of gambling in the form of lotteries. You pay for education via the lottery. I mean, I remember in Youngstown, you played the bug. I'm sure you know. Remember, you throw a nickel or a dime down, you play the bug, right? Yep. And so you have this massive expansion of credit, and the purpose of it is to get people to buy stuff they don't need, because the economy, the inexorable rule of capitalism is continued growth. If capitalism quits growing, it dies. So once people, you know, the first stage of capitalism, producers capitalism, you built factories and you built machines and you built railroads. That's not stuff that you would buy on your own. That's not a consumer item. You don't buy your own factory, you don't buy your own railroad. The next phase in the 20s is consumer capitalism, where you like create canned goods and automobiles, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, things like that, can openers, processed foods, things like that a consumer will buy. Well, by the 50s and 60s, you have this massive growth of the economy, post-World War II. And in the post-World War II era, the U.S. controls 50% of the world's trade. There's a prescient man, George Kennan. I don't know if you ever heard of George Kennan, diplomat. One of the very honest and candid, one of the most candid statements in 1948. Kennan said, "We have 6% of the world's population, but control 50% of the world's wealth. Our task in the coming years is to devise a pattern of relationships to maintain this position of disparity." He didn't say our task is to feed the world, our task is to create equality, our task is to give housing to the homeless, to create better opportunity. He didn't say anything. Our task in the coming world is to maintain this position of disparity where 6% we control 50% of the wealth. So there's this massive wealth, and you can't keep that going unless people buy more and more things. One of the keys, in fact, to civil rights was to create and develop the South and create a consumer class out of African Americans. That's 20 to 25 million people who aren't buying stuff at Sears and A&P and Fazio's and places like that. So credit becomes the key force in this transition to a new era of consumption. You make these credit cards available to average people, not just to people who are fairly well off. And with this comes this massive expansion of private debt. Private debt exceeds public debt. Everyone in America has the equivalent of about $80,000 in private debt at birth. So.
Can you talk about how planned obsolescence fits into all that?
Yeah, and planned obsolescence is part of it, right? You build things that purposely aren't going to last as long as you want them to, or that will be outdated. I mean, Windows whatever, Windows 7 or Windows NT, Windows XP, this, that. You purposely build stuff that will, what are they on? iPhone 5 now or something like that?
Will be 4.
Yes. It's 4 now?
4S.
Oh, 4, okay. I mean, but you purposely build stuff. Now, that's the beauty of the military-industrial complex. Not only do you have planned obsolescence, but once you fire a bullet, you can't use it again. Once you shoot down, get an airplane shot down, you can't fly it again. So, but that's crucial. Yeah, if they made good, I mean, you could easily make a car that would last 20, 25 years. But if you did that, then you wouldn't keep selling. So you do that, and then advertising is crucial to this too. The amount of money spent. What's that? Oh yeah, you have to get the new. I mean, look, the history of cigarette advertising is fascinating. Not that many people smoked in the early part of the 20th century, and whoever was brilliant came up with the idea of putting pictures of naked girls in cigarette cartons. So young men started buying cigarettes to get these pictures of naked girls, and then smoke the cigarettes, and they're hooked, because in every other week there would be like a new girl on it, like a Playboy model or something like that. And so advertising is brilliant at this too. It convinces people you need stuff you don't need, and then credit. That's what you're saying. And then it's like the emails we get.
Yes, all this stuff.
Yeah.
That's just unbelievable. That's what I call the drug dealer business model.
It is. I mean, until last year, the laws changed. On campus at UH, where I teach, they would have these tables where they would give a kid a T-shirt and have them sign up for a credit card. 18-year-old. That's what dealers do. You get your first hit for free, or the first couple hits, then you're hooked. And that's what they do. These kids' credit cards with a $500 limit, which they max out immediately. Then they raise it to $1,000.
Roommate wants a stereo.
Yeah.
Now, didn't this expansion of capital compensate for the stagnant wages?
That's exactly what it did. Yeah. Instead of paying people more wages, you made more credit available. Absolutely, absolutely. And who did that benefit? The banks, which issued the credit cards.
And corporations.
And corporations, yeah.
With the first few colonies, somebody came up with this brilliant marketing idea or strategy to say that cleanliness is next to godliness, right? And from what I hear, that was the first soap sales movement in America.
If you see the original ads, they do that. They also, very early on, the whole idea of sex is as soon as you see advertising.
That changed our whole culture. We became the cleanest culture in the world.
Yeah. But they also have these ads where they'll have a woman in distress because she can't get a man unless she uses Palmolive soap or something like that.
Did you see the history for the cigarettes and women's rights movements to vote? And the cigarette companies got on in that and called them Liberty torches, and they put them here, and then so that just. I'm gonna switch the marijuana cigarette. That's the new Liberty torch. I'm gonna use that hat.
To what was just said about the cigarette smoking, my father was at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and served the year before and through the rest of the war. One of the things he told me is that the companies that manufacture cigarettes handed out free packs of cigarettes to the soldiers and Navy and people in the Pacific. Now, I have to assume that the same thing happened in Europe, but I don't know that.
It did.
You did it?
After they were already traumatized.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Even today. Very minimal cost, and the bulk of the cost is tax for military people.
What's happening now is the smoking rate has gone down so far because we have banned television advertising of tobacco. But guess where it's up? Yeah, they've increased the price here. But guess where the cost is recovered?
Young people.
Third world and fourth world, because there's a show on current TV called Vanguard, and they have a documentary where their journalist is standing there and saying to the people gathered, there is a school, here is a cigarette stand. Does anybody have a problem with it?
Yes.
They're setting up cigarette stands in Indonesia across the street from elementary and middle schools.
No, you had a question.
I just wanted to let everybody that's here know. My friend Curtis is passing around a list. If anybody wants to talk about further economics and possibly solutions, all you need to do is sign up on that list. All I had to say. Thanks, guys.
The cigarette thing, let me add to that, because you're familiar with the Opium Wars. You know what the Opium Wars are? The British waged war against China because China tried to eradicate opium, massive addiction problem. And so it's a public health campaign, which was succeeding. So the British waged war to force the Chinese to take in Indian opium that the British controlled. Well, this is what the U.S. is doing. It's not just that tobacco companies are marketing in places like Indonesia. In fact, I think it was Indonesia, had a public health campaign specifically directed to lower the rate of smoking in Indonesia. The United States threatened trade sanctions against Indonesia. If it limited or made it more difficult to sell U.S. cigarettes in Indonesia, then the U.S. would retaliate against Indonesian products coming to the U.S. It's the opium wars all over again. Right now, the biggest smoking country in the world is China. The biggest market for tobacco. About 2/3 of China smokes. They're going to have a massive lung cancer epidemic and horrible pollution problems. And that's why the U.S. could take these hits, these court cases, and a reduction in smoking in the U.S. because it's a pittance compared to what they're making in the third world. Absolute pittance.
On the opium wars, we're doing that in Afghanistan right now.
Yeah.
Instead of co-opting it and using it to make the drugs that we make that use opium, we're trying to eradicate it because it interferes with our business.
What keeps the capitalists from turning on each other and creating products that will actually last and that would do consumers a favor?
That's generally how smaller companies get started. They make a better product, and the problem there is most of those better products cost more, so they don't have the same access to a mass market. I like motorcycles. I have a Ducati and a Triumph. I mean, those things are going to last a long time, but I paid for them. I could buy a Yamaha 650, which isn't gonna. So I mean, you can buy a product that's going to last, but it's not going to be mass market and it's going to cost more. I mean, that's the problem right now with green sustainable products. Right. You can make a good product, yeah, and you can get it on the market and you can make a good profit off of it, but you're not going to reach a mass market. If you're content with that, you can still do that.
I made more money in 1974 in the retail clerks than they pay people at Whole Foods today.
I want to throw out a word that we've heard with the green economy, and that's sustainability. Sustainability. I'm kind of thinking that maybe democratic capitalism, where democracy rules cartel capitalism, but cartel capitalism does not rule democracy, may kind of look like a sustainable kind of market. I don't know. I haven't thought this through, and I'm going to have thousands of conversations and read books and stuff before, I finally figure it out. But that's a word, sustainable.
That is the big word.
That is an interesting word to me because the cartel capitalists on Wall Street say they have a right to make a profit. They say that they have a right to increase shareholder value. They say they have a right to market to anybody and trick them by any means to get them to buy stuff they don't need with money they don't have. And I call that cartel capitalism. The word cartel is from a friend of mine. I used to call it nuclear meltdown capitalism. Now, I'm not in favor of nuclear power, but there are three things that can happen when you have a nuclear reaction. One is it can blow up. One is it can melt down, as happened in Fukushima, Japan. And the third thing is what the first nuclear reaction at the University of Chicago, Enrico Fermi, I believe, did in the late 30s or early 40s. He created a controlled nuclear reaction. And the way you control it, now see, they use funny words. They say, can we take this plant at Fukushima down to a cold shutdown? Well, what does cold mean? I'm cold right now. You know what a cold nuclear shutdown is? 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what they call a cold shutdown. Well, hell, I didn't know that when we voted on the nuclear power plant in 1980 4 times or whatever it was here. I knew there were cooling ponds that they put the uranium rods in because they're 2,500 degrees. I didn't know that, but I knew they were hot and they had to cool. But again, what they did not tell us is far more important than what they did. They did not tell us that there was a danger if water leaked out of the cooling ponds, because that would expose the uranium pellets, and it would have a nuclear reaction, and it would melt down. Those are the two kind of meltdowns that Fukushima had. Fukushima had a meltdown of its nuclear power reactors, and Fukushima also had a meltdown in their cooling pools. Well, hell, I didn't know that cooling pools could melt down. But the third thing that I want to say about a nuclear reaction is when you do one like Fermi in the University of Chicago, which is where nuclear power supposedly comes from, they said it was going to be too cheap to meter in the early 50s. Oh, nuclear power is the answer for everything. It'll be free. But what Enrico Fermi discovered is that you can control a nuclear reaction by inserting what are called control rods, basically carbon and stuff. You can make it hotter by pulling them out. You can make it cooler in nuclear physicist terms by pushing them in. The reason I think cartel capitalism is nuclear meltdown capitalism is because democracy should be the control rods.
First, they ignore you. Then they laugh at you. Then they fight you. Then you win.
I heard them say the revolution won't be televised. Al Jazeera proved them wrong. Twitter has them paralyzed.